Men listened to him now with the same politeness reserved for someone whose voice no longer carried weight. Doors opened, but only briefly. Conversations ended early. He had traded loyalty for safety and discovered too late that safety without respect is only isolation. One evening, weeks after the testimony, he crossed paths with an old acquaintance who had once envied his position. "You should have stayed quiet," the man muttered. The betrayer shook his head. Quiet wasn't an option anymore. That truth followed him everywhere. Bumpy Johnson, meanwhile, resumed his role with careful precision. He did not seek revenge against everyone who benefited from his absence. That would have destabilized the very balance he intended to restore. Instead, he focused on accountability, on reminding men that power carried responsibility, not entitlement. Those willing to adjust found room to operate. Those unwilling found themselves irrelevant. Community leaders noticed the difference first. Church organizers, business owners, and long-standing residents sensed a reduction in pressure. Less harassment, fewer reckless confrontations, more predictability. One Harlem shop owner put it simply, "Feels like someone's watching again." They were right. The police noticed too. Older officers remembered Bumpy Johnson clearly. They remembered negotiations that worked, boundaries that held, and a man who understood consequences better than most men with badges. Younger officers learned his name not from stories, but from instruction. "Be careful," a captain told his men. "This isn't a vacuum anymore." That caution was not fear. It was recognition. Bumpy Johnson had never declared war on authority. He had simply refused to be dismissed by it. The final measure of justice came not from courts or newspapers, but from silence. The gossip faded. The speculation ended. Harlem moved on. And that, more than anything, confirmed Bumpy's success. One night, standing outside a club on 125th Street, Bumpy watched the neighborhood breathe. Music drifted through open doors. Laughter cut through traffic noise. The city looked alive, not frantic. A man approached him cautiously, younger, respectful. "They say you waited 11 years, the man said. Bumpy nodded once. "Most wouldn't have had the patience." Bumpy looked at him. "Most don't understand timing." The man hesitated. "Did it feel like revenge?" Bumpy considered the question. "No," he said finally. "It felt like correction." That distinction mattered. Revenge looks backward. Correction faces forward. In quiet rooms across Harlem, the story began to settle into its final shape. Not as a tale of violence, but of restraint. Not as a myth of brutality, but of authority reclaimed without spectacle. Men spoke of how Bumpy Johnson returned without announcing himself. How he dismantled betrayal without destroying the community. How 11 years of hiding had not softened him, but disciplined him. And slowly, the lesson took hold. Legends don't chase attention. They wait until attention has nowhere else to go. The man who once betrayed Bumpy would never fully escape his decision. But he would live. That was Bumpy's final judgment. To live with truth. To live without cover. To live knowing that patience had defeated him more thoroughly than any weapon ever could. And Harlem understood. Justice had been served, not loudly, but completely. Time has a way of sorting out noise from truth. Months passed, then a year, and Harlem did what it always did. It adapted. But this time, the adaptation carried memory. People remembered what the neighborhood felt like before everything fractured, before impatience replaced discipline, before men confused survival with leadership. And they remembered who restored the balance. Bumpy Johnson did not become more visible after the reckoning. If anything, he became quieter. That silence was deliberate. Legends did not need to repeat themselves. Their presence alone was enough to shape behavior. Meetings happened differently now. Men arrived prepared. Disrespect was checked early, not escalated. Conversations carried weight again. Decisions were made with an understanding that consequences were no longer theoretical. Bumpy had returned not as a tyrant, but as a standard. Older residents spoke of him with something close to relief. They remembered the years when Harlem had functioned with an unspoken code, when business was business and chaos was not mistaken for power. Mothers felt safer letting their sons linger on stoops. Shopkeepers stopped paying multiple sides just to stay open. It wasn't peace in the storybook sense. It was order. And order, in Harlem, had always been precious. Bumpy's name circulated again, but not loudly. It appeared in cautionary conversations, in reminders given to young men eager to prove themselves too quickly. "Learn patience," an uncle would say, "or you'll learn consequences." Everyone knew who that lesson came from. The betrayal that once threatened to erase Bumpy Johnson from the map became, instead, the event that clarified his legend. Men spoke of how he waited 11 years without losing focus, how he returned without violence, how he forced accountability without destroying the neighborhood. Those details mattered. They separated myth from mastery. Anyone could pull a trigger. Few could wait. Fewer still could correct an imbalance without replacing it with chaos. That was the difference Bumpy represented. The man who betrayed him faded from relevance completely. Not ruined, not redeemed, simply finished. In Harlem, that was often worse than destruction. To be remembered only as a warning, never again as a voice. When his name surfaced, it came with a lesson attached. Remember what happens when you confuse safety with loyalty. And then the conversation moved on. Bumpy Johnson lived long enough to see the truth of his choice. Had he chosen immediate revenge, the story would have ended in blood and headlines. The neighborhood would have paid the price. Authority would have tightened its grip. Outsiders would have found justification. Instead, by waiting, by documenting, by forcing truth into daylight, Bumpy reshaped the future without drawing unnecessary attention. That was power refined. In private moments, those closest to him understood the cost. Waiting 11 years required discipline most men did not possess. It required swallowing anger, watching others profit, accepting silence where reputation once lived. But Bumpy understood something few ever do. A legend is not measured by how fast he reacts, but by how precisely. Harlem carried that lesson forward. Long after names changed and faces disappeared, the story endured. Not as folklore, but as instruction. A reminder that respect is not seized, it is enforced through consistency, memory, and restraint. And whenever someone asked how Bumpy Johnson maintained control without constant violence, the answer was always the same. He never forgot, and he never rushed. That was the legacy. This was never just a story about revenge delayed. It was a lesson in power understood. For 11 years, Bumpy Johnson carried betrayal without broadcasting it. He watched the world adjust to his absence, watched men mistake silence for surrender, watched Harlem absorb pressure meant to break it. And when he returned, he did not do so with noise or bloodshed, but with memory, patience, and precision. That is what separated him from ordinary men. Anyone can react in anger. Anyone can lash out when wounded. But only a legend understands that timing is authority, and restraint is dominance. Bumpy did not destroy the man who betrayed him. He did something far more lasting. He forced him to face the truth in daylight, stripped of protection, stripped of excuses. Justice was not theatrical. It was complete. And Harlem felt the difference. The streets grew steadier. Power recalibrated. Respect returned. Not because fear demanded it, but because balance required it. Bumpy Johnson reminded everyone watching that leadership is not about chaos, and revenge is not always about violence. Sometimes, it's about correction. This moment did not just restore one man's reputation. It reinforced a code, a warning to anyone who believed time erases accountability. A reminder that legends do not disappear when they go quiet. They wait. And when they return, they do not ask for recognition. They take their place. This wasn't just about one man surviving betrayal. It was about a community reclaiming dignity, about patience outlasting panic, about respect being earned the hard way and enforced the right way. Because in the end, 11 years of hiding didn't stop Bumpy Johnson's revenge. It perfected it.